I knew the second Scott Palmer leaned back in that expensive chair with that stupid smirk on his face that this was going to be one of those days you remember forever. The kind where your whole life changes in about 30 seconds. Scott sounded cocky, like some 37-year-old hotshot who thought his MBA taught him everything about running a telecommunications company. Badge, laptop, and access cards on the table, Carl. Now. No explanation, no private conversation, just a public execution right there in the quarterly operations meeting. 22 employees watching from their seats and video calls, including Nicole Parker, the 24-year-old systems developer I'd been mentoring for the past 2 years. She looked like someone had punched her in the gut. Hell, we all did. My name's Carl Bennett, and I'm 49 years old. Been with Pinnacle Communications for 15 years, built their entire network security setup from scratch. Started here after I got out of the Army Signal Corps, where I'd spent 8 years, keeping communication systems running in places that would give your average IT guy nightmares. Mostly stateside, but a couple deployments that taught me patience, planning, and never to trust anything that seems too easy. When I walked into this place in 2009, it was a small regional ISP with maybe 60 employees and network security that was basically held together with duct tape and hope. I was 34, fresh out of the service and ready to build something that would actually last. Met my ex-wife Susan at the company holiday party that same year. She worked in billing back then, had this laugh that could fill up a room and actually listened when I talked shop. We had some good years before everything went sideways. The divorce was final 3 years ago, but we still work together when it comes to Jeremy, our 20-year-old son who's studying electrical engineering at State. Kid's got my head for systems and his mom's people skills, which makes him way smarter than both of us. The tuition hits my bank account like a freight train every semester. $18,000 for in-state plus room and board brings it to about $27,000 total. Between that and helping my disabled brother Tony at his care facility, $2,800 a month, I wasn't exactly rolling in money on my $78,000 salary, but I was making it work. Had been for 15 years through 3 CEOs, 2 major mergers, and more digital transformations than I could count. Scott actually paused after access cards like he was waiting for applause. This was the efficiency expert they'd brought in 6 months ago to streamline operations and cut costs. Translation: fire the expensive old guys and replace them with cheaper alternatives. Apparently I was too expensive for keeping 850 network nodes and our entire customer data system safe from every hacker with a laptop and an attitude. The thing is, about a year ago I'd had what the doctors called a minor heart episode. Nothing serious, they said, but enough to remind me I wasn't 30 anymore and needed to keep my health insurance. My doctor wanted me to cut back on stress. Guess the universe had other plans. You seem surprised, Carl, Scott continued, clearly loving every second of this. Surely someone with your background understands the need for operational efficiency in today's competitive market. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of begging. 8 years in the Army teaches you that some battles aren't worth fighting in public. I took off my badge with one smooth motion, the same way I'd removed my uniform for the last time all those years ago. Set it next to the laptop I'd already shut down during his little speech and placed my access cards beside them like I was getting ready for inspection. You'll get information about Cobra and your final paycheck from HR, Scott added, his voice carrying across the dead-silent conference room. Security will escort you to collect your personal stuff. That's when I had to bite back a grin, because Scott Palmer, with his shiny MBA from some fancy program, had no clue what he'd just done. He thought he was firing some middle-aged network guy who'd gotten too comfortable and too expensive. What he'd actually done was fire the guy who built their entire digital security system. See, about 8 years ago, when the company was growing fast and needed better security between their customer networks and our infrastructure, I'd proposed building a unified monitoring platform. Management loved the idea, but nearly choked when they saw the vendor quotes. $340,000 for setup, plus $85,000 every year for licensing. That was serious money for a mid-sized ISP. So I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. Let me build it myself through my consulting company, CyberGuard Solutions, for half the price. I'd started CyberGuard as a side business years earlier, mostly doing small security jobs for local businesses. Nothing fancy, just solid work that brought in some extra cash. But this project was different. This was going to be my masterpiece. Over the next 3 years, working nights and weekends while still doing my regular job, I built them a system that didn't just handle network security. It managed everything. customer data protection, threat monitoring, intrusion detection, even the access controls for our server farms. Every digital function in that 80,000 square foot building ran through CyberGuard's system. And because I'd learned a thing or two about protecting myself in the Army, I wrote the licensing agreement myself. Legal signed off on it without really reading the fine print, too focused on the cost savings and impressed by my technical docs. Buried in Section 7, subsection C, was language so clear even a first-year law student couldn't miss it. This license shall remain valid only while the named founder remains actively employed by the licensee. Termination of employment, voluntary or otherwise, will result in immediate termination of the master license. I walked out of that conference room, with my head up, security following me like I was some kind of criminal. Philip Jackson, the security supervisor, was a good guy I'd known for 10 years. He looked embarrassed as hell. "Sorry about this, Carl," he muttered as we headed toward my desk. "This whole thing stinks." "Just business, Philip," I told him. But inside I was thinking about that licensing agreement and wondering how long it would take them to figure out what they'd lost. My desk looked exactly like I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug still half full, picture of Jeremy at his high school graduation wearing that proud smile, and a small American flag I'd kept since my discharge ceremony. 15 years of my life getting packed into 2 cardboard boxes. As we walked toward the exit, I could feel eyes on me from every cubicle and office. Some looked sorry for me, some curious, some probably just glad it wasn't their turn. Keith Rodriguez, my closest buddy in the network engineering department, gave me a quick nod. Nicole. Parker looked ready to cry. Out in the parking lot, I didn't get mad. Getting mad clouds your judgment, and the Army had beaten that lesson into me during some pretty long nights fixing broken communication gear. I sat in my truck with my hands on the wheel, feeling oddly clear-headed for the first time in months. 15 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended. But as I drove home through the afternoon traffic, something else was settling in my mind. Scott Palmer had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The thing about military training is it teaches you to think ahead and plan for different scenarios. Driving home that afternoon, I wasn't feeling sorry for myself about getting fired. I was running through variables. HR would process my termination paperwork by end of business. The system would update overnight. By tomorrow morning, every network node, every security monitor, every access point in that building would be trying to get authentication from a license that no longer existed. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from the office. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and quiet, which is all I need these days. After Susan and I split up, I sold the house we'd bought when Jeremy was little. The extra money went into his college fund and Tony's care fund, which was looking pretty important right about now with my sudden unemployment. The apartment complex is mostly working people, nurses, teachers, a couple other tech guys. Mrs. Garcia next door is a retired school administrator who always asks about Jeremy when she sees me. Good people, the kind who get that life sometimes throws you curveballs and you just roll with it. I poured myself a couple fingers of bourbon, nothing too fancy, but way better than what we used to drink in the barracks, and sat down at my kitchen table with my personal laptop. The CyberGuard Solutions admin panel loaded up like it had thousands of times before, showing me everything about their infrastructure in real time. 850 active connections, customer networks running smooth, threat detection systems all green, data protection working perfectly, everything normal, everything about to change in about 12 hours. The beauty of the system I'd built was how simple it was. One master server handling everything, with backup systems that all pointed back to the same licensing check. I designed it that way on purpose. Single point of control, impossible to work around without admin access that only existed in my CyberGuard database. Scott Palmer probably thought CyberGuard was just some boring tech company name. He'd looked at the budget, seen my salary, and decided I was an expensive luxury they could do without. What he didn't get was the difference between cost and value. I wasn't just another employee. I was the guy holding the whole thing together. My phone rang around 7:30 p.m. Keith Rodriguez, my closest friend in the network engineering department and one of the few people who actually understood what CyberGuard did for the company. We'd worked together for 12 years, and I'd taught him most of what he knew about network security. Solid guy, good engineer, and smart enough to see the big picture. "Carl, man, What the hell happened today? His voice sounded angry. Scott just fired you in front of everybody. That's completely nuts. Cost optimization, I said, taking another sip of bourbon. The warmth spread through my chest, and for the first time all day, I felt my shoulders relax. Apparently 15 years of keeping hackers out of customer data costs too much. This is total garbage, Carl. Half the department is talking about looking for new jobs. Martinez from maintenance said if they fired you, nobody's safe. I appreciated the loyalty, but Keith had a mortgage and 2 kids to think about. His oldest was a sophomore in high school, probably looking at colleges soon. Don't do anything stupid, Keith. You've got a family to feed. Yeah, but still. He paused and I could hear him thinking. In the background, I caught the sound of kids laughing, probably watching TV with their mom. Normal family sounds that reminded me what I was missing. Hey, weird question. That security system you built, CyberGuard, whatever, what happens to that now that you're gone? There it was. Keith was smart enough to start putting pieces together, even if he hoped he was wrong. You'd have to ask Scott about that. I don't work there anymore, remember? A longer pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Carl, please tell me you didn't build in some kind of kill switch. Nothing dramatic, I said honestly. Just standard licensing stuff. Everything's in the contract legal signed off on years ago. Very straightforward business terms. Jesus, how long do we have? You should probably ask the new management about their backup plans. I kept my voice neutral, but Keith knew me well enough to read between the lines. We'd worked too many late nights fixing problems together for him to miss what I was getting at. Carl, listen to me. Whatever you're thinking, remember there are good people there who don't deserve to get hurt by this. That stopped me for a minute. Keith was right. There were good people at that company. Nicole Parker, just starting her career, eager to learn and full of ideas. Philip Jackson from security who'd walked me out looking embarrassed. The customer service people who remembered my birthday every year. The tech support guys who knew I'd drop everything to help them solve a problem. But then I thought about Scott's smirk as he told me to pack my dignity along with my laptop. The way he'd turned my firing into some kind of show, making sure everyone could see him flexing his authority. The complete disregard for 15 years of dedication and loyalty. The good people will be fine, Keith. This isn't about them. What about our service contracts? The municipal government account, that healthcare network. We just landed. Those are management problems now. I'm sure Scott has it all figured out. After I hung up, I walked out onto my small balcony and looked toward the business district where the office building's lights were visible against the night sky. 3 shifts running around the clock, managing networks for small businesses, government offices, healthcare facilities, critical stuff that needed rock-solid security. Somewhere in there, Scott was probably still at his temporary office, working late to impress the board, maybe planning his next round of cost cuts, maybe celebrating his first victory in what he probably saw as a war against inefficiency. In about 10 hours, his phone was going to start ringing. I finished my bourbon and went inside. Tomorrow was going to be interesting, but tonight I had real stuff to deal with. COBRA paperwork to look over, unemployment benefits to file for, and a tough conversation with Jeremy about what this meant for his college money. My severance package would cover 6 weeks, and I had some savings, but when you're flying solo financially and supporting college tuition plus a disabled brother, there's not much room for error. I called Jeremy around 9 p.m. knowing he'd still be up. College kids keep crazy hours, and he was probably either studying for his digital circuits exam or playing video games with his roommate. Hey, Dad, what's up? He sounded tired, maybe stressed about classes. Electrical engineering isn't easy, but he was handling it way better than I'd handled my signal training back in the Army. Got some news, son. Lost my job today. Silence for a few seconds. I could hear his dorm room in the background. Typical college noise. Seriously? Why? New management? Cost cutting? Nothing I did wrong, just politics. Dad, are you okay? I mean, money-wise? Should I look into more loans or maybe transfer somewhere cheaper? This is why I was proud of that kid. 20 years old and already thinking like a man. His mother raised him right, even though our marriage didn't work out. Don't worry about that right now. I've got some options and we'll figure it out together. Just focus on your studies. If you need me to come home, absolutely not. You stay right where you are and keep working hard. I didn't spend 15 years building systems so you could drop out because some consultant got happy with the pink slips. But as I said it, I realized that maybe, just maybe, Those 15 years were about to pay off in a way Scott Palmer never saw coming. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm, same as I had for the past 15 years. Old habits die hard, especially when the Army drilled them into you for 8 years. For about 3 seconds, I started going through my usual morning routine. Shower, coffee, check overnight alerts, drive to the office. Then reality kicked in. No office, no alerts, no job. The quiet was weird. For over a decade, my phone had been buzzing by 7 a.m. with some crisis or another. Security alerts, network slowdowns, customer complaints about connection problems. I'd become the go-to guy for everything digital, which meant my phone never really stopped ringing during work hours. But this morning, nothing. Just the sound of traffic outside and Mrs. Garcia next door starting her car to go volunteer at the school district office. Normal sounds of people going to work while I sat in my kitchen, suddenly unemployed at 49. I made coffee in my little French press, the good stuff I usually save for weekends, and checked my personal laptop out of habit. The CyberGuard admin panel showed exactly what I expected. License status displayed terminated in big red letters across the top of the screen. Below that, error messages everywhere as 850 connections tried to get authentication from a system that no longer knew them. The thing about good engineering is that when it fails completely but cleanly. I hadn't built in any nasty code or dramatic explosions, just a clean, immediate cutoff. Every access attempt got the same polite error message. Authentication temporarily unavailable. Please contact your system administrator. Of course, their system administrator had been fired yesterday. Network status showed red across the board. Security monitoring systems offline. Customer data protection asking for authentication. Threat detection down. Even the employee badge readers at the main entrance were locked out. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each system finding out it couldn't talk to the others. My phone stayed quiet until 8:47 a.m. Then it started. Text from Nicole Parker. Mr. Bennett, nobody can log into anything. Network security, customer portals, threat monitoring, everything's down. Keith doesn't know what's wrong. People are stuck in the parking lot because the badge readers aren't working. I didn't text back. Nicole was a smart kid and she'd figure out the connection soon enough. Plus, I wasn't their employee anymore. Whatever problems they were having were management's job now. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Keith Rodriguez, his voice tight with stress. Carl, we've got a major situation here. Everything's locked up tight. Can't access security controls, can't monitor customer networks, can't even check threat levels. We've got 140 people standing around waiting for someone to manually let them through the front gates. Sounds rough, I said, keeping my voice neutral while sipping my coffee. Carl, come on. This is the CyberGuard system, right? That licensing thing you mentioned last night? I don't work there anymore, Keith. You'd have to ask management about their vendor relationships. A pause, then quietly, how long before they figure out what's happening? Depends on how smart your new operations guy is. I took another sip of coffee and looked out my kitchen window at the morning traffic. Somewhere in that stream of cars were dozens of my former coworkers sitting in parking lots, unable to get through the automated security gates because their access system was down. Jesus, Carl, the customers are going to flip out. We've got that municipal contract expecting 99.9% uptime. The healthcare network can't afford any security gaps. That's when I felt the first little stab of guilt. Keith was right. This wasn't just about Scott Palmer. Every minute the system stayed down meant angry customers, potential data risks, and lost money for a company that employed a lot of good people with families and mortgages and college payments just like mine. But then I thought about Scott's smirk as he told me to pack my dignity along with my laptop. The way he'd turned my firing into some kind of theater, making sure everyone could see him showing off his authority. I'm sure Scott will figure something out, I said. He's got an MBA, right? Probably learned all about crisis management in business school. By 10:15, my phone was buzzing constantly. Texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, all asking the same basic question. Is this because you got fired? Around 11:30, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Bennett, this is Rachel from Emergency IT Support. I'm calling because we're having some technical problems with our security systems, and your name came up as someone who might be able to help. Poor Rachel. Probably some contractor who'd been handed a phone and told to start calling anyone who might know something about their setup. She sounded young, maybe fresh out of college, definitely way over her head. Sorry, Rachel, but I don't work there anymore. You'll need to contact CyberGuard Solutions directly for any licensing or technical stuff. I see. Do you have their contact information? I had to bite back a laugh. Should be in your vendor database. Or you could Google it. CyberGuard Solutions should come right up. We tried that. The website just has a contact form. We've been trying to reach someone all morning. Well, I'm sure they'll get back to you when they can. These things take time. My phone rang again at 1:15 p.m. This time it was a number I knew. The main company line. Carl. It wasn't a question. Scott's voice was totally different now. No more smugness, just something that sounded like barely controlled panic. Scott. I kept my voice level, professional, like I was talking to any other business contact. We need to talk. I don't work there anymore, remember? You made that pretty clear yesterday. A pause. In the background, I could hear voices, stressed-out conversations, the sound of a company in full crisis mode. Someone was arguing about calling customers to explain service outages. Someone else was asking about insurance coverage if they couldn't monitor security threats. Look, we're having some issues with our security systems. The vendor says the license is tied to you personally. That's right. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully, probably with someone coaching him in the background. What would it take to get that fixed? And there it was. Less than 24 hours after firing me in front of 140 people, Scott Palmer was asking for my help. The same guy who told me to pack my dignity along with my laptop was now forced to come crawling back, begging for the expertise he'd thrown away as too expensive. But I wasn't about to make this easy for him. You'll need to talk to CyberGuard Solutions about any licensing stuff, I said calmly. I believe you have their information. Carl, come on, we both know you are CyberGuard Solutions. Then you should probably talk to them about getting service restored. I'm just enjoying my first day of retirement. I hung up before he could say anything else. Not angry, not dramatic, just clean. The way you end a business call when there's nothing left to discuss. The quiet after I hung up on Scott lasted exactly 52 minutes. Then my phone rang again, but this time it was a number that made me sit up straight. Roger Taylor's direct line. Our CEO didn't make social calls, especially not to guys who'd just been fired. Carl, it's Roger Taylor. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. Military guys learn to recognize when their commanding officer is keeping it together through pure discipline. We need to talk. Afternoon, Roger. I just got out of the worst 3 hours of my life listening to our entire management team explain why we can't secure our own networks. You want to tell me what's going on here? I respected Roger Taylor. He was 58, former Navy communications officer who'd built this company from a 40-person operation into a 300-employee ISP. When he talked, people listened, including me, but respect didn't change the facts. I don't work there anymore, Roger. Scott made that pretty clear yesterday. A long pause. Carl, I wasn't in that meeting. I was in Denver meeting with potential enterprise clients. When I got back this morning and heard what happened, I couldn't believe it. Believe it. Your efficiency consultant decided 15 years of know-how was too expensive, and now you can't even monitor a network connection without calling the vendor. Roger's voice had that dry humor of someone who'd seen enough corporate stupidity to last several lifetimes. Help me understand something. This CyberGuard system, that's yours? My company built and licensed it to you, yeah. And the licensing terms are exactly what legal signed off on 8 years ago? Another pause. I could hear him thinking, probably pulling up the contract on his computer. Roger was hands-on enough to read the fine print himself. Son of a gun, Carl. Valid only while the named founder remains actively employed. How did this get past everyone? It didn't get past anyone. It was reviewed, approved, and signed by the right people. The system worked perfectly for 8 years until yesterday. Until yesterday, Roger agreed. Roger went quiet for almost a minute. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into command mode. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Can you be here at 3 p.m.? You offering me my job back? I'm offering you a conversation. The rest we'll figure out in the room. At 2:45 p.m., I walked back into the building I'd been escorted out of 26 hours earlier. Philip Jackson was working manual override on the main entrance, letting people in and out by hand since the electronic access system was still down. He looked embarrassed when he saw me. Hey, Carl. Sorry about, well, all of this mess. Not your fault, Philip, just doing your job. The elevator was running on backup power, manually operated. I rode up to the executive floor thinking about how much had changed in less than 2 days. Yesterday, I was walking out with my boxes. Today, I was walking back in to negotiate from a position of strength. The boardroom was tense when I walked in. Roger Taylor sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 board members I knew: Linda Cooper from Legal, Mark Williams, who represented the investors, and Jennifer Adams, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a laptop open in front of her. "Carl, thanks for coming," Roger gestured to an empty chair. "I think you know everyone except our emergency IT consultant, Jennifer Adams from Secure Net Recovery. Jennifer, this is Carl Bennett, our former network security director and the founder of CyberGuard Solutions." Jennifer looked up from her screen. "Mr. Bennett, I've been reviewing your system setup. It's comprehensive. Thanks. Also completely impossible to get around without admin access. My firm handles system recovery, and I've never seen anything this tightly locked down." Roger leaned forward. "Jennifer estimates 4 to 6 weeks and $180,000 to rebuild our infrastructure from scratch, assuming we can find all the documentation and retrain our people on new systems." "What about our current operations?" Linda Cooper asked. "Dead in the water until Mr. Bennett decides to restore the license." Scott shifted uncomfortably in his chair at the far end of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept in 30 hours. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his Silicon Valley confidence had melted into something that looked like barely controlled panic. All eyes turned to me. I opened the folder I'd brought and slid copies of a single document across the table. New licensing agreement. Updated terms reflecting current market rates and how critical this service actually is. Scott finally spoke, his voice strained. "What are you asking for?" I kept my voice calm, professional. "Restoration of the master license under a 3-year agreement at $95,000 annually, paid in advance. Consulting contract for system documentation and knowledge transfer at $125 per hour, estimated 200 hours. And a written acknowledgement that yesterday's termination was handled wrong." The room went dead quiet. Linda Cooper was already scanning the contract, her legal brain checking for problems. Mark Williams was running numbers on his phone. Roger Taylor was watching Scott, probably wondering if his efficiency consultant was worth keeping around. "The acknowledgement letter," Scott said slowly. "What exactly would that say? That the decision to fire me was made without proper consideration of what the company actually needed and that the process was unprofessional." Scott's face went pale. "I'm not admitting I screwed up." "Then your systems stay down," I said simply. "Your call." Roger Taylor leaned back in his chair, studying Scott like a naval officer deciding whether to surface in hostile waters. After what felt like forever but was probably 30 seconds, he turned to me. "We'll sign." The rest took another hour, but it was mostly details. Jennifer Adams would work with me on the knowledge transfer. Keith Rodriguez would get promoted to senior network security engineer with an $8,000 raise. Scott Palmer would be transferring to the corporate office for strategic initiatives within 30 days. Everyone understood that was corporate speak for career over. When the last signature was done, I stood and shook Roger's hand. "Pleasure doing business with you, Carl," Roger said quietly. "For what it's worth, this never should have happened. No, sir, it shouldn't have. But it did. And now everyone knows what institutional knowledge is actually worth." I walked out of that building with a 3-year contract worth $285,000, and the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd not only survived an ambush, but turned it into a strategic victory. Behind me, Scott Palmer was probably updating his LinkedIn profile and wondering how he'd explain this disaster to future employers. 2 weeks later, Jeremy called to tell me his grades were good enough for the dean's list. I didn't tell him that his tuition was locked in for the next 3 years, or that his old man had just learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own bad decisions. That's how you handle it. When someone mistakes your quiet competence for weakness, you don't get mad, you don't get loud, you get professional terms and conditions that make sure it never happens again. And when you walk back into that same conference room where they humiliated you, you do it with a contract in your hand and the knowledge that respect isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes it has to be demanded. Sometimes the people who talk the least are the ones holding everything together. The loudest lesson comes when they simply walk away and let gravity handle the rest. In a world that worships youth and credentials, never forget that some knowledge can't be Googled, some experience can't be taught in business school, and some bridges shouldn't be burned because you might need to charge a toll to cross back. The real power isn't in being indispensable, it's in making sure the right people understand exactly what they're about to lose before they make the biggest mistake of their careers.